Happy Thanksgiving month, everybody, and Tony here with my review of Offenbach's Les Contes Hoffmann, which I saw last night at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden. The conductor was Bertrand de Billy. The production was done by Lydia Steier. The sets and videography were done by Mama Hinrichs. The costumes were done by Ursula Codorna. The lights were handled by Olaf Frese. The choreographer was Tabitha McFadden. The chorus master was Dani Joris, and the dramaturgs were Maurice Lehnhardt and Christoph Lang. I was really excited to check out Lydia Steier's production of Offenbach's Les Contes Hoffmann at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden because it boasted such a star-studded cast consisting of Pene Patti as Hoffmann, Roberto Tagliavini as the four villains, Ya-Chung as the four servants, Serena Saenz as Olympia, Julia Kleiter as Antonia, Zonia Heranen as Giulietta, and Emma Nikolovska as Niklause or the Muse. I'll talk about the singers much later in this review, but first, my thoughts on the production. The production of last night's performance of Le Conte Hoffmann transports the action from 18th century Nuremberg to New York in, let's say, between the 1960s and 1980s. More specifically, the seedier parts of New York, whether it be the Bronx or Harlem or basically the Lower East Side. We see a drunk and inebriated Hoffmann about to sing Que Sera Sera when the overture begins, and he ends up being mugged and pickpocketed until a kindly old lady comforts him. And he also meets up with the Muse, who in this version comes off as like the guardian angel from It's a Wonderful Life. And what was quite vulgar and really uncalled for about this production is how the four villains dressed. More specifically, when Landorf enters the scene, he's not dressed in his usually spiffy, fashionable, commanding attire as a counselor, but he makes his presence as the devil really clear, especially when he has his enlarged penis, which really put me off. And his underlings also have their fair share of enlarged penises. And it's not subtle that Landorf, let alone Coppelius, Miracle, and Dappertutto are Hoffmann's devils because he also has those horns. I get that this is supposed to signify that he is like the Mephistopheles to Niklause's guardian angel from It's a Wonderful Life, and Landorf, Coppelius, Miracle, and Dappertutto is basically the villain from The Devil's Advocate. But it was a little bit too over the top for me. And in terms of Luther's Tavern, it's not set in a tavern, but more of a seedy bar called Purgatory, in which it's basically where Hoffmann tells his stories, and that's where all the students convene to have a drink and do dancing and do a lot of revelry. And speaking of dancing, while Hoffmann sings his Kleinsack aria, Landorf's underlings, and even a cameo from Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies makes a cameo to also show that it's a very bizarre situation that Hoffmann finds himself in, especially when he narrates about this unusual little dwarf called Kleinsack. It would have been a little bit more satisfying if we actually had the Kleinsack do his little dance, because how it was choreographed reminds me of a mishmash between Saturday Night Fever and Thriller, especially with all of the spooky elements coming into play. And speaking of which, I do assume that the old lady is supposed to be either Stella's grandmother or a grandmotherly figure who tries so hard to ensure that Hoffmann stays in the path of righteousness and doesn't give in to self-destruction. And on top of that, Hoffmann is really disheveled and totally dirty looking, especially when it comes to his graying hair. And at least Landorf, in his devil form, comes in with a more suitable attire in the prologue. Then we get to the Olympia act, in which I do enjoy the cleverness of how it's set up. It's set up in a Christmas store akin to Mr. Duncan's Christmas store from Home Alone 2, let alone anything that you've seen from Miracle on 34th Street and It's a Wonderful Life. Not to mention, Cochineal is the mall Santa who not only entertains all the families coming to shop at Spallanzani's Christmas store, and Spallanzani is essentially this version of Mr. Duncan, but he also finds himself incredibly drunk, thus also showing that he's not the warm and cuddly mall Santa that kids would like to be entertained with, but he's also someone who's quite a mischievous person. And Olympia, she's also kind of like the Barbie doll prototype, but a lot more innocent looking. And there's also the appearance of the younger Hoffmann when he is so enamored with Olympia the doll, and it's almost like a gender-bent nutcracker, where little Hoffmann is the Clara to Olympia's nutcracker prince, and with the kids just making fun of his whole fascination with this doll, which parallels nicely to how Hoffmann, given the spectacles that he wears, sees Olympia as an actual person, let alone woman, who can satisfy his romantic desires, let alone sensual desires. But when he takes off those glasses, he sees that sweet, innocent little doll. And with the Olympia act being set in a Christmas store, I thought it was absolutely clever and thoroughly fun. It definitely brought in a lot of Home Alone 2, Lost in New York vibes, as well as Miracle on 34th Street and It's a Wonderful Life vibes. Then we go to Antonia, in which her action transports from Munich to a more rundown area of Manhattan, let alone somewhere in Harlem, or basically where people have not achieved quote-unquote upward social mobility. And what I've noticed about this act is that Antonia and the only family member that she has, Crespel, are essentially German immigrants who have made their lives in the USA, and Crespel has a violin-making factory with Franz, cross-dressing as Franzi, serves as the overseer. How it was staged might have limited the possibilities for Antonia, Dr. Miracle, the ghost of Antonia's mother, and Hoffmann to interact a lot more freely, but I guess in its defense, it kind of shows that there is intimacy between Hoffmann and Antonia, as well as that desperation that Miracle implants on Antonia to have her go on the stage and be reunited with her long-dead mother. And speaking of that final trio between Dr. Miracle, the ghost of Antonia's mother, and Antonia herself, Crespel doesn't come rushing in after the trio and after Antonia hits her high D flat. Instead, Antonia slashes her wrists with a piece of broken glass, and she doesn't sing her final line to Crespel, stating that, oh, it's her mother that she saw, and she'll be finally reunited with her, and lets out those lovely little trills, and then dies. instead, Crespel rushes in, sees Antonia dead, and her act ends. As for Giulietta's act, it's set not necessarily in a luxurious palace in Venice. I do apologize in the previous video that I say to Verona, but in a seedy bar for prostitutes and for a lot of people engaging in sex. And Giulietta comes off as a Jessica Rabbit figure. And in this production, Giulietta does not run off with Pitichinaccio. Instead, she ends up stabbed by Hoffmann after the septet. Hélas, mon cœur s'égare encore. And even going back to the previous Antonia act, what was also quite clever and fun was Hoffmann heading into an elevator and finding himself a lot younger, as if though this was the same thing that happened to Faust when Mephistopheles promised him that he was going to have eternal life and youth, especially when he sees Marguerite. So there are definitely those parallels between Hoffmann as Faust and Antonia as the Marguerite. As for the epilogue, yes, all the manifestations of the four villains, i.e. Landorf, Coppelius, Miracle, and Dappertutto, try to drag Hoffmann to hell, but the muse reminds Hoffmann that he still has inspiration, he still has a lot going for him, and even the old lady intercedes, which leads Hoffmann to go up the elevator and to finally find newfound inspiration. And even the former loves witness Hoffmann take that elevator to the heavens. So this production done by Lydia Steier was absolutely fun and fascinating, especially when it comes to all the costumes being used, whether it's transporting the action from 18th century Nuremberg to New York between the 1960s and 1980s. It was quite a welcome treat to see a modern production have a lot of fun and inject a lot of pop culture references, most notably from Faust, Back to the Future, Michael Jackson's Thriller, Home Alone 2, It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street, and even a little bit of Who Framed Roger Rabbit and the Jeffersons. So this was definitely something that could appeal to anybody who is fascinated with popular culture and also finds those links to also enjoy an opera. And now we get to the singers, starting off with Benepati as Hoffmann. I've been following this gentleman's career for what feels like over a decade, and I've always admired his charisma. I've always admired how much elegance and ebullience he was able to provide each and every role that he sings. And he also had a career in both classical crossover singing as well as in serious opera. I've always admired how much of a charismatic performer he is, and here as Hoffmann, he shows his wonderfully unbeatable charisma in terms of what he was able to produce so well. And his singing was also full of ardent urgency, which made me thoroughly root for Mr. Patti as a singing actor. He definitely got into the role so amazingly, especially when he was able to provide Hoffmann his jadedness with everything that's been going on with him, his feeling of being tempted to commit something unthinkable, as well as realizing that he can be a lot better than what he used to be, let alone all of his failures in love. He definitely made me root for him and therefore salute him in terms of what he could do as a singing actor. He also managed to launch some high C's here and there, and his high notes were definitely the strong point of his overall performance. One could ask for a more virile, pharyngeal, and a more masculine sounding voice full of core, much like the ones I have admired in tenors such as Peter Anders, Roger Bain, Richard Tucker, and Neil Shikoff, as well as naturally wonderful lyric tenors such as Francisco Araiza and Jerry Hadley, because they also had a lot more developed core. They had a lot more roundness and overall strength in all the registers. And I'd even add in Siegfried Jerusalem, who I've always insisted was a natural spinto tenor and not a Heldentenor. He was definitely one of the finest Hoffmanns ever, especially when it came to his combination of ardent singing and peerless vocal might. The other drawback is Benepati singing in the mask and sometimes having a bit of a nasal emission when he could actually be a lot more pharyngeal in his singing, develop a lot more core and a lot more depth and strength, as well as ensuring that he eliminates mask singing all the way. Furthermore, he did give into crooning, which, although in theory does heighten Hoffmann's impassioned romantic nature, it kind of makes him feel like he's overdoing certain aspects of soft singing. Regardless of whatever Achilles heels Benepati has, I still have to give him major props for carrying the weight of the show on his shoulders and in everything that he accomplished so magnificently as a singing actor. And I still have to give him his props for being such an unbeatably charismatic performer. His Niklaus, or muse, was Emma Nikolowska, who I also saw 2 years ago as Octavian. She has a pleasing, creamy, and well-balanced mezzo-soprano voice that can also hit those soprano-like high notes. Granted, I would have wanted to have a little bit more depth and chestiness, a la Annalisa Müller or Maria von Ilofsvay, but what Emma Nikolowska was able to accomplish as Niklaus was absolutely brilliant, and she even managed to use coordinated chest tones really well. Her instrument definitely got stronger and stronger throughout the opera, and her absolutely amazing charisma and her involved flair for drama made her thoroughly stand out so magnificently. Serena Sayenth was a charming Olympia, and she was able to handle all of her high notes, her coloratura work, and her overall vocal magic with flair and involvement. There were occasions where she did get kind of muddy in certain coloratura passages, and I would have wanted to have a little bit more clarity, a la Roberta Peters and Rary Grist, who are two of my most favorite Olympias of all time. But what Serena Sayenth managed to offer as Olympia was a lot of charm, a lot of amazing vocal fireworks, and just tossing high notes left and right with flair and a whole lot of involvement. Mind you, she sang Les Oiseaux de l'Archambault during her time as a master's student when she was singing this particular aria as her final concert piece. But the experience that she had as Olympia, especially when she sang the role back then in Vienna, was absolutely brilliant, and she definitely showed a lot of charisma and charm as a singing actress. Julia Kleiter was admirable as Antonia, and I've always admired this lyric soprano ever since I was a young teenager. As I mentioned before in my review of her performance as Eva Pogna from the Meistersinger von Nürnberg back when the Staatsoper was at the Schillertheater, she started out as a sort of light soprano singing Papagena and Celia before transitioning to the light lyric soprano role of Pamina, and eventually doing a lot more full lyric soprano roles such as Contessa Almaviva, Eva Pogna of course, Donna Anna, and the Marschallin. And her silvery instrument is still present. She could still hit that cadenza high D so well, and her high D flat was absolutely brilliant. She was able to be thoroughly involved as a singing actress. She brought in a lot of brilliance as Antonia, and she was thoroughly committed to her craft as a fine singing actress. I did kind of miss a little bit more core and a little bit more chest voice coordination because Antonia is not just high singing. She also has to have a lot of coordinated chest tones and really good chest tones at that. It says a lot when singers such as Jory Bouet, Valerie Masterson, Ileana Kotrubash, and even Mariela Devia, as well as Anna Moffo and Christiane Eda-Pierre, who is still one of my favorite Antonias of all time, unless I forget about Yarmila Novotna, Lucina Mara, and Eleanor Stieber, had way more coordinated chest tones than Julia Kleite could accomplish. But regardless, Julia Kleite was able to be thoroughly involved as a singing actress, and her contributions as Antonia were absolutely sterling from beginning to end. Zonia Heranen was wonderfully elegant as Giulietta, all thanks to her creamy and luscious full lyric soprano voice that has all the potential to sing more lirico spinto roles. She has a well-coordinated instrument from bottom to top. She did not wobble whatsoever. But I wish that she had her solo aria, L'amour lui dit la belle, or in this case, Venus de a fortune, because that would have been an amazing experience to see and hear Sonia Heranen give the vocal goods as Giulietta. But what she was able to offer was elegant singing, a beautifully plush and round and creamy voice, and a vocal presence that makes me thoroughly convinced that one day she will definitely conquer roles such as Desdemona, Elisabetta di Valois, Arabella, the fourth maid from Elektra, Dimut from Feuersnot, and a whole lot of roles suitable for her natural full lyric soprano voice, unless I forget about Elisabeth from Tannhäuser, Elsa from Lohengrin, Eva Pogna from Meistersinger von Nürnberg, and Gudrune from Götterdämmerung. These roles are what I would love to hear Zonia Heranen in, and she's got a great future ahead of her, and I cannot wait to see and hear what this amazing young lirico spinto soprano has to offer. Roberto Tagliavini was in absolutely unbeatable form as the four villains, Landorf, Coppelius, Miracle, and Dappertutto. He brought in that suave virility and that oozing manliness and that menace that made him thoroughly brilliant as a singing actor. Sure, I can never forget the likes of George London or Nikola Gusalev, let alone Samuel Ramey or José Vendôme if I want a little bit more panache and elegance, or even Roger Soyer if I want a little bit more roundness and richness. And lest I forget about Ernest Blanc, especially where Dappertutto is concerned, Geraint Evans, where Coppelius is concerned, and lest I forget about Gusalev, where both Landorf and Miracle are concerned, and James Morris, one of my personal favorite singers for all four villains, and even where Miracle is concerned, and Justino Diaz, and Gabriel Bacquier. Those gentlemen were absolutely unbeatable in those select roles. But what Roberto Tagliavini had to offer was oozing virility and fine musicianship, nobility amidst that acidic and absolutely diabolical villainous nature. And he was just an overall dark gentleman on stage who managed to make these roles work. And I'd also love to see him one day as Don Giovanni, Asur, and Banco, as well as roles that are suitable for his basso cantante voice. And I also hope that he also takes some tips and tricks from the likes of Cesare Siepi, Nikolai Gyaurov, Giorgio Tozzi, and the man, the myth, and legend himself, Ezio Pinza, and let's not forget about Jerome Hines, so that he could also maintain that rich basso cantante plushness. Ya-Chung Huang was yet another show stealer as the four servants, André, Cochenille, France, and Pitichinaccio. Yes, André did not really appear in the first act, but Cochenille or André did appear in the epilogue, in which he is about to be dragged to hell but ends up getting out of that ditch. But regardless, I still love Ya-Chung Huang. I still think that he is one of the most brilliant light lyric / character tenors of all time. And he definitely has a charisma that is thoroughly unrivaled and unbeatable. This gentleman knew how to make these characters work extremely well in his favor. He was thoroughly brilliant. He was an unbeatable singing actor, and he had a lot of charisma to back him up, full of strength, especially in his bel canto way of singing, as well as how much he was able to make André, Cochenille, France, and Pitichinaccio work extremely well, both as individual servants as well as part of the collective whole. His musicianship remains sterling and evergreen as ever, and he definitely deserves a lot of A pluses, salutes, and laureates that can provide for this extremely handsome and excellent character tenor whose bel canto way of singing is absolutely unbeatable. Florian Hoffmann was a characterful Spallanzani who was able to use his character tenor voice so exceedingly well. Manuel Winkler was sufficiently plush, handsome, and noble as Luther, especially helped with his constantly growing basso cantante / basso profondo voice, which I would love to see and hear grow with a lot more depth, richness, and a whole lot more cavernousness, especially when I encourage him to listen to the likes of Gottlob Frick and Kurt Böhme to hear what cavernous singing actually sounds like. Stefan Czerny was noble, dashing, and thoroughly heart-wrenching as Crespel, also thanks to his basso cantante / basso profondo voice, which maintained its resonance and absolute fine quality all the way through. Jaka Michalotz was a dashing schlemiel, all thanks to his cavalier baritone voice. David Ostrek was a tall, handsome, and thoroughly commanding Hermann, all thanks to his bass baritone voice, which was full of volume and richness. Alvaro Diana was absolutely brilliant, charming, and exceptionally handsome as Nathaniel, all thanks to his light lyric tenor voice, which just blooms and blossoms and makes me love him so much as a fine singing actor. Natalia Skritska was superb as Antonia's mother, although I do expect a little bit more contralto depth and richness a la Margareta Klose, Marion Mateos, or Betty Allen, just to name a few of the superb singers of Antonia's mother, and lest I forget about Maria von Ilosvai and a lot of the great contraltos of the past who sang Antonia's mother. But regardless, Natalia Skritska was a fine singing actress with a lot of nobility and elegance. And we even have the honor of having Brigitte Eisenfeld, a former Olympia, Sabinetta, Constanza, and Blondchen, act the role of the old lady with dignity and class. And special kudos also has to go to Albert Kopechke as Hoffmann when he was a child. So overall, the singing as well as the performances were thoroughly brilliant. I still have to salute Bene Patti for his brilliantly charismatic stage presence and his vocal abandon. The singers for the three heroines, Olympia, Antonia, and Julieta, namely Serena Sayenth, Yulia Klaito, and Zonia Heranen, for their absolutely wonderful musicianship. Roberto Tagliarini and Ya-Chung making a meal out of their respective roles or ensemble of roles as the four villains, Landorf, Coppelius, Miracle, and Dappertutto in Tagliavini's case, and André, Cochenil, Franz, and Pitichinaccio in Ya-Chung Huang's case. All the superb vocal contributions that Emma Nikolovska had to offer as Niklaus, aka the Muse, as well as Stefan Czerny, Manuel Winkler, David Ostrek, Jakub Michalotz, Alvaro Diana, Florian Hoffmann, and Natalia Skritska doing absolutely amazing jobs in their respective roles, and the laudability that I have for Brigitte Eisenfeld as the old lady can never ever be questioned. So overall, this singing was of uniformed brilliance and wonderful efforts from everybody, from the main singers all the way up to the supporting cast. The conducting done by Bertrand de Billy was brisk, brilliant, and absolutely involving. I managed to feel a sense of excitement and thrills when he managed to whip up that orchestra into shape. And you could definitely tell that he knew the score really well. He managed to bring in a lot of brilliance and spark to the orchestra with that balance that he managed to emit so well. And he just managed to have such a ball in conducting Le Conte of Man so well. And the chorus, the orchestra, and the extras of the Staatsoper Unter den Linden were absolutely brilliant, involved, and were thoroughly wonderful. And special kudos also has to go to the Corps de Ballet at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden for contributing so beautifully. Lydia Steier's production of Le Conte of Man may not be to everybody's cup of tea, but for me, it was an exciting modern production that managed to hit a lot of interesting and fun notes. And what made this evening so special was all the singing accomplished by everybody, from Penne Patti to Roberto Tagliavini, to Serena Sayenth, Julia Klaito, and Sonia Heranen, to Emma Nikolovska, all the way up to the likes of Natalia Skritska, Jakub Michalotz, David Ostrek, and Alvaro Diana, as well as Florian Hoffmann and Brigitte Eisenfeld's absolutely superb contributions all the way through. Everybody was at their A game, and they were all able to deliver the goods and made this production, let alone premiere, so thoroughly brilliant. And for those of you who caught this production of Offenbach's Le Conte of Man at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden, what'd you think of it? Did you feel that Lydia Steier's production of Le Conte of Man was thoroughly exciting? And is it a modern production that you enjoy? Did you feel that there was a moment that you particularly loved, whether it was in the production itself or the singers? Did you feel that Pati did a wonderful job as Hoffmann? Was there a singer that you really loved in this particular opera? Or did you feel like everything was not really to your liking? Please let me know in the comments below. Well, that's it for my review of Offenbach's Le Conte of Man at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden. Tune in next time for another review. So until then, happy Thanksgiving month, everybody.